What is your, "Oh, I've got to get the hell out of here right now," story? St. Patrick's Day, midnight. I, 26 at the time, female, was walking home from the Irish bar where I worked. I saw a lad attack a girl and run. I checked on the lass to make sure she was all right and stayed with her until the police arrived. I gave my statement and told them I was nervous about walking home. Two guys who were on the scene offered to walk me home. The policeman said, "There you go, you're sorted." That's right, he sent me off with two strangers. I scolded myself for being so nervous and told myself it was really nice of them to offer to walk me home. We were about halfway to my house when they started talking about what they'd witnessed, how that girl deserved to be attacked, and that their friend, the attacker, had done nothing wrong. My spidey senses weren't just tingling, they were electrifying. We were coming up to the last populated street before the dark alleyway and then the park I needed to walk through to get home. I knew if I kept walking with these guys, I was in danger. I just freaking knew. I checked my phone and told them my friend was in the conveniently nearest club just across the road, thanked them for their offer to walk me home, and headed to the club entry before they could say anything. I jumped in a taxi. As we drove past the alleyway, those jerks were waiting for me. They'd called my bluff about going into the club and were watching out for me. I don't know what they'd have done to me, but that's my biggest "listen to your instincts" story, and I'm really freaking glad I did. I was kicking myself because my manager, who was also my friend and mutual crush, had offered to walk me home, but I didn't want him to have to walk all the way back in the other direction afterward. One time I was driving through Kansas in the middle of the night with my girlfriend on a road trip, summer of 2017. We had issues with the car breaking down in Nebraska and were sputtering along until we reached Colby, Kansas, and waited for night so the roads were less busy. As we were driving along, not Highway 70 but just south to stay off the highways, a semi caught up to us. The car did not want to go past 50 to 60 miles per hour, and I did not want to push it and break down. Needless to say, I was going too slow for this semi-truck. For about an entire hour this guy was riding my bumper and flashing his lights, but he never honked his horn. I would slow down and pull off to the side a little bit to let him pass, but every time I did he would slow down too and give me a ton of space. It was now about 2-3 a.m. We were in the middle of nowhere, coming up close to the border of Colorado. He was still constantly riding up to my bumper and turning his lights on and off again. We finally came across a gas station and pulled over to a pump on the right side. I cannot emphasize enough how literally I mean middle of nowhere. It is flat desert forever in all directions. It was an empty shell gas station that was closed and really dark. We hoped the truck would just pass us, and we pretended to pump gas. This freaking truck slowed down all the way and stopped right there on the road next to us. He proceeded to back his truck up enough to pull into the gas station behind us, perpendicular to our car. I started losing my composure and looking around. I was standing outside my car, and my girlfriend was screaming for me to get back in. This guy got out of the semi and started walking directly toward us. He was only about 50 yards away when I noticed a small brown pickup truck sitting on the back side of the shell, eerily placed. I noticed someone inside it. I ran toward him. As I got closer I realized there was a police badge painted on the side of this brown pickup and the man inside was actually an officer. I can only imagine what this guy on late-night duty was thinking when I ran up to him. He rolled down the window with a confused look on his face. My girlfriend was screaming at me in panic as this guy got within 10 yards of the car, while I was spitting about 50 words out of my mouth in about 2 seconds explaining our situation. The officer did not say a word and just drove around our car. The man noticed and made an immediate U-turn back toward his truck as the officer was yelling at him to stop. I hopped back into my car, looked in the rear-view mirror for a second to see the officer getting out to try to talk to this guy. I turned on the car, hit the gas, and drove into Colorado a few minutes later. I will spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if that officer had not been sitting there that night. Whoever you are, man, bless your soul. 3 years ago, a severe earthquake hit the center of Mexico. I was on the 3rd floor of my school building when the horrible-sounding seismic alarm went off and the building began shaking like jello. Bookshelves were falling, parts of the ceiling crumbling, people screaming. It was hell. In all that madness, your only instinct is yelling at you to get your butt out of the freaking building, because you know tons of steel and concrete will come down on you if you do not. However, and it is a big however, unless you are on the ground floor, you do not have to take any stairs or elevators to get out and the exit is nearby. You must fight that instinct. It is vital to stay where you are and crawl next to a desk, chair, or bed, anything that can shield you from debris. If the building collapses while you are halfway to the exit, your survival chances are pretty thin, especially because stairs are the first structures to fail in an earthquake. So my classmates and I stayed in the fetal position next to our desks, fighting our "get out of here right now" instinct and waiting for the shaking to stop. In the end, thankfully, our school did not collapse, but several buildings nearby did. Interesting fact. The silence immediately after an earthquake is terrifying, and then you start hearing dogs bark, helicopters buzzing, and ambulance sirens. My parents liked going to the backyard gatherings of their friends, which were thinly veiled excuses to get drunk. They dragged us kids along for some reason, but I never cared much for sitting around watching a bunch of adults get hammered. There was always something stupid that happened, and more often than not it was violent. Now, you have to understand that these friends they associated with were scum, wannabe gangsters, drunks and addicts, petty thieves, domestic abusers, and one ex-convict who claimed he had helped take the life of perverts in prison. They were the very picture of the dregs of modern society. The night in question had the full cast of lowlifes, freshly scraped from the bottom of the barrel and packed into one backyard, and in hindsight there was no way something was not going to happen. It started when one guy put his hands on his wife. The ex-con did not take kindly to that and punched him out. That guy's buddies stood up to square off, and so did the ex-con's buddies. It quickly devolved into shouting and exchanging blows until one of the guys, who lived next door, came out with a freaking chainsaw. I was inside the house on the property when I heard the yelling and screaming, and a pregnant woman who was crying ran in with some kids. I sat there bewildered until my parents ran in, both seeming almost sober from the adrenaline, and essentially told my brothers and me, "We need to go now." We stayed at a cousin's house nearby because they were still in no condition to drive, and to this day I refuse to go to any of those crappy little gatherings. Senior year of high school, a friend of mine and I decided to explore a pioneer cemetery near the railroad tracks after dark on Halloween night. We were totally sober and just looking for a good way to scare ourselves. To get there, you have to park off an unlit road at the end of an abandoned industrial area and walk about a quarter of a mile on an unmaintained dirt road, bushes overgrown, weeds up to your waist, and so on, before you reach the cemetery. We brought no flashlights, just used the moonlight to guide us. We were almost there and had been whispering and giggling the whole way when all of a sudden we both got quiet at the same time. I felt an overwhelming sense of doom hit my whole body, and I stopped in my tracks. She did the same. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt like someone had poured a bucket of ice water down my back. My heart was racing. My friend and I were just looking around and listening, and her eyes were so wide when I looked at her that I could make them out perfectly in the darkness. We stayed like that for about a minute, just listening and hearing nothing. I said to her loudly, "We should probably get back to your brother in the truck. I'm sure he is mad we are taking so long," thinking a good bluff would make me feel better. Just over my shoulder from behind a tall bush, but I swear it sounded like it was right in my ear, a man's voice said quietly, "Yeah, you probably should." We both turned and ran as fast as we could back to her truck. It felt like an eternity to get there, and we threw open the doors and jumped inside. She jammed the key in the ignition and started the engine, but being a new driver and terrified, she kept letting the clutch out too soon and the engine would die. Finally, after about 5 attempts, she got the engine going and we tore out of there and back to my house. During that whole run I was terrified to look behind me. I didn't look out the window as we were trying to drive away either. We, being young and foolish, laughed about it later and almost convinced ourselves that it didn't happen. A few years later, I was talking to a sheriff from that county and told him the story. He looked at me like I was a total idiot and said there was a huge homeless encampment there for years due to the proximity of the railroad tracks and the relative isolation in an urban area, small grocery store and other resources within walking distance. They used to patrol that area frequently because of that encampment. I think my friend and I were lucky we didn't get ourselves into more trouble than we did that night. Man, we were naive. I'd recently moved to another country and met an American guy with whom I decided to go drinking in a small village about half an hour away from the city where we both lived. We had a few beers, some laughs, a little karaoke, and decided to call it a night. My seal had broken much earlier in the night, and, in the taxi on the way home, nature called once more. I tried to hold it as long as I could, but it was a beer piss after all. At this point, I only knew a few words in the local language, so I asked my pal, who was fluent, to tell the driver that I'd appreciate it if he pulled over so I could relieve myself. I've learned since then that the locals have a habit of 1. Pretending they don't understand foreigners if it inconveniences them. 2. Making no effort to listen when a foreigner speaks because they assume they won't understand. Or 3. Genuinely not understanding due to pronunciation differences or quirks related to local dialects. I've no idea which of these language barriers occurred on this particular night, but the driver continued to ignore the American even after he had repeated himself numerous times. I had finally resigned myself to the fact that I was either going to have to hold it in or wet myself on the back seat of this cab when, suddenly, the American, fed up with what he, rightly or wrongly, perceived as being ignored, grabbed the wheel and spun us off the road. We went hurtling into a field, the driver slammed on the brakes, and we narrowly avoided smashing headfirst into a tree. For the next 30 seconds or so, I have no idea what happened because I immediately jumped out of the car to ease my bladder. After the jubilation over my release had worn off, it finally occurred to me what the heck had just happened. I looked up and saw the American scuffling with the taxi driver he had just scared half to death. He broke free, and we started across the field. About 500 meters from the car, he realized that he'd left his bag, including his passport, in the car. He went back, and I left. I hitchhiked for around 10 minutes along the road until somebody picked me up. I later discovered that the guy was an ex-Marine with the words, "I will kill you," tattooed across his chest. The armed forces had seriously messed him up, and he had huge anger issues. I always found him pleasant enough, but after that experience I kept my distance. As to what happened after he returned to the car, I never got the full story. I expect he had to pay reparations to the driver and a bribe to the police. My cousin and I went cruising around late one evening, about 1 a.m., in a deep country area. We decided to take random roads and ended up in a clearing with a single house. You could see a glow in the backyard too big to be a campfire. It looked like a barn fire from the glow. As we kept driving, my cousin got a feeling and cut the lights. The moon and the glow of the fire lit the road ahead a little. As we approached the other side of the house, we saw not a barn fire but a freaking cross on fire. There were about 5 guys in robes, and they were looking right at us. My cousin blew a U-turn and gunned it. We did not know what was up ahead, it could have been a dead end. As we headed for the tree line, I looked back and saw their truck lights turn on. My cousin did not slow down at all, even on the wooded road. You could still see their lights through the brush. After about a minute or two we hit the main road, and he accelerated hard. I looked back, and their lights were about to reach the main road themselves. My cousin cut the lights and made a left past the cemetery, driving without headlights, using only the moon. When we got to the top of the hill, the truck lights were barely visible, but they finally reached the cemetery intersection and we saw their taillights. They went right. My cousin kept the lights off for a bit until we got close to home. As we pulled into the driveway, our adrenaline started to subside. Never did we think we would crash a clan gathering, let alone be chased by them. We went back during the day about 3 months later to see if we could learn anything, but the house looked abandoned, like no one had lived there for years, so we figured it was just used as a spot for their meetings. Nice and secluded, with a single road that passes by. We checked where the road led, and it was a heavily rutted route that twisted and turned until it reached a major highway, so making that U-turn was the right choice. We would have been caught. Last fall, my dive buddies and I went on a spearfishing trip to one of our favorite wrecks. About 5 minutes in, a 10+ foot great white swam up to us. It got a little too close for comfort a couple of times, circling behind us and whatnot, so we got out and headed to a different wreck a few miles away. I jumped out of the boat and, as soon as the bubbles cleared and I could see, I was met by another, even bigger white shark not 10 feet away. He was right freaking there next to me. I nearly messed my wetsuit, and we all scrambled back into the boat as fast as possible. Once we were back in the boat, we dangled one buddy over the side and he shot a decent amberjack. We were hoping to get the shark's attention and film it eating the fish, but it never went for it. We figured it wasn't hungry, so we decided to hop in and film it a bit. The second shark wasn't as pushy as the first. After checking us out initially, it never came much closer than 6070 feet or so. We fished around it for about an hour and almost everyone got a nice African pompano for dinner. My buddy had warned me about the first shark, so I was expecting it when I saw it, but the second shark came as a total surprise. When I saw it, all I could think was, I've got to get the heck out of here right now. When I was in Afghanistan, we were loading up aerial flares into their pods. These flares are about 0.9 m long and very heavy, and you stuff a bunch of them into a pod so they can be ejected from an airplane or helicopter at night to light everything up. There were about 7 to 10 of us in a building doing this work. One guy was stuffing a flare into a pod using a large pole. It lets you push it all the way to the rear so you can fit more in. He didn't push the flare in far enough before trying to use the pole, and the flare slipped, causing the end cap to pop off and engage the ignition timer. All we heard was a pop, a buzzing sound, and the guy saying, "Oh crap." We all immediately ran to the exits because things were about to explode. Amazingly, the first guy who got to the door suddenly couldn't figure out how to open the darn thing. I was thinking to myself that I was going to die from a freaking movie trope. I pushed him out of the way, opened the door, and shoved him outside so we could all sprint to the nearest bunker. I knew there was only a 30-second fuse, so the whole time I was counting down and I knew I was only going to make it to the bunker right outside the building. It wasn't going to really protect me, since we had a huge amount of explosives in the building we were working in, thousands upon thousands of pounds. So I decided to say, forget it, and turned around to watch what was about to happen. Everyone else kept running to the next bunker, which was hundreds of feet away but impossible to reach with the time left. I waited and watched. And I kept watching. A good amount of time passed and nothing happened. It turns out the flares also need the pressure and weight from the parachute while falling to ignite. We were safe the whole time, we just didn't have time to process that possibility. After that we went back into the building, duct taped the flare cap onto the flare, and kept stuffing. While living in the deep south you occasionally meet some real shitheads. Some drug addicts down the road stole a rifle from a buddy of mine, and this was the last straw, as they had harassed a number of people in the area, including my parents. They were constantly stealing stuff from our shed and threatening my folks for money. They lived in a secluded area with lots of trees off a dirt road. It wasn't their property, so just being there was probably illegal. We lived out in the middle of nowhere, so you really don't see police come out that way. It's all farmland and dirt roads. I snuck out there one night to take back my buddy's rifle. I definitely saw some illegal stuff, like weapons, a meth lab, a puppy breeding room, and so on, when I went there. I found his rifle and got out. As I was heading back, I heard their vehicle coming down the road and had to lie low in some bushes. I could have sworn they spotted me, but they actually drove right past. I was honestly ready to use that rifle if they came after me. Thankfully, I got out of there without being seen. They did notice the rifle was gone and came looking for it, but I had hidden it for a few days before returning it to my friend, so they couldn't really accuse him. My boyfriend and I stopped off at our local McDonald's on a day out. It was a hot summer day, and we planned to eat outside on some building steps, but a huge gang of teenagers was hanging out front causing issues, so we ate indoors. As we left, these lads were making a fuss and being verbally abusive to passers-by. One of them tried to go into McDonald's for food, and the employees, who had already called security on them, pulled the doors shut and locked them to keep the kid out. The kid lost it and started kicking and smashing the door, and his mates joined in. Security was on the way, and my boyfriend and I noped out because we didn't want to get caught up in the conflict. We decided it was safer to head home and skip the rest of the shopping mall. As we walked away, some police were heading that way. I assume security had called them. The next day the local news reported that the gang scattered. The ones who were caught were thrown off the premises and banned. However, less than an hour later some of them came back and knifed another teenager. The kid survived, and the one who used the knife, along with his gang, got arrested. I was in a room at school that I wasn't meant to be in. The teacher came in, and I hid under these sofa-like benches, without backs, that were all pushed together in the corner, with just enough room underneath for me to squeeze in. The teacher's class came in, and he started to teach his lesson. I was still hiding under the benches, planning to stay there until the lesson was over and everyone left. He hadn't noticed me yet. It was a great hiding spot. That is, until he told the class, "These benches are in the wrong place, we need to move them." I nearly had a panic attack. I imagined the embarrassing moment that would occur if he moved the benches and found me lying there. I could just about see his feet, so I waited until he turned around. Then I shuffled backward, picked up a carpet burn on my chin, and came out from hiding without him noticing. It felt like a miracle. I put on my face mask, for COVID and so that he wouldn't recognize me, and casually walked out without him noticing. It was a miracle that I managed to escape unnoticed, and my heart was pounding so loudly as I left the room. A couple friends and I bullshitted our way into a house party in 2011. We didn't know anybody there, or maybe one friend knew a guy who knew a guy. Anyway, we weren't really supposed to be there. We mingled for a bit in the living room/kitchen area, then decided to go out back to smoke. It was packed, probably like 40 or 50 people in a 1,000 square foot yard. Everyone was chilling, drinking, talking. The three of us were huddled in a corner smoking cigarettes, trying to look cool. Randomly, somebody bumped into a big cholo dude wearing a Los Angeles hat, long denim shorts, and a big white tee, you know the look. It wasn't a fight or anything, just the incidental bumping that happens when there are that many people in a backyard. Nobody was pissed off. What made everyone uncomfortable was the straight-up revolver that fell out of this dude's shorts. It looked like a classic Western six-shooter, about the length of my forearm. Everyone saw it. The cholo dude saw it. He saw that we had all seen it. We saw that he had seen us see it, and so on. It felt like a scene from a cartoon. I think the music even stopped. Then he bent down, picked it up, and put it back in his shorts. Everyone went back to what they were doing. My friends and I looked at each other, didn't say a word, finished our cigarettes so as not to cause a scene, and then quickly left through the side door. We went to Denny's. Not super dramatic, but that was the first time I had ever seen a gun in real life. So my wife and I were shopping for a house a few years back. The realtor we had was actually my sister-in-law, and she was fairly new, but we liked looking at houses with someone we knew and trusted rather than some random person. One place we looked at was legit just a joke. We wanted to see how weird and messed up it was, and my sister-in-law was more than happy to show us. The sellers no longer lived in the house, so we didn't need to schedule them to be away for the visit, which my wife and I prefer. Right when we arrived, 3 or 4 cars were in the driveway, but none of them looked like they had run for a while, so maybe they were just left there. The outside had unfinished stucco and the yard was overgrown, but we had seen that online. The inside had hardly any pictures, and that's what we wanted to check out. The door didn't have a knob, it was locked only by the chain. My sister-in-law tried to unhook the chain from the outside, but I already felt this place was a bust. Then the door flew open and some guy stood there looking at us like we had woken him up. We explained who we were, and he said he was the seller's son, supposedly there to pack up the leftover stuff. He let us in and showed us around this odd house. The living room was the first space we entered. It was oddly sunken, so you had to step down into it, and a bedroom sat directly to the left that you had to step up into from the living room. It was dark, with newspaper covering the windows, dusty, and full of junk. Then he took us to the kitchen, which was basically a hallway. You also had to step up from the living room, and it was probably a 6 by 10 foot hall that ended with a step down into a large unfinished room. Another room to the left was also dark, dusty, and full of junk. There was a mattress and a chair in the large room, and a tablet on a cooler playing 18+ videos. The back door in that room was nailed shut. I noticed all the windows were also nailed shut, and I realized he could trap us in this odd house since he was standing between us and the only exit. We played nice but got out as soon as we could without raising suspicion. We called the owners, who told us to call the cops. He wasn't supposed to be there. My mom, a female friend, and I were on holiday in South Africa. We traveled to Warner Beach and were told at our hostel to avoid being out after dark. We were not watching the clock, but it was our first night in the area and we did not want to take any chances as female travelers. We are all motorbike lovers and spotted a little car park with bikes parked up as we were walking back to the hostel, so we glanced in to see what bikes were around. The small group of men who owned the bikes waved and called us over for a closer look. We figured we would take a quick look and head back, keeping our guard up. After some small talk about the bikes, traveling, etc., one of them said he was a motorbike pastor, and offered us a copy of the motorcycle Bible. While he was talking, I noticed an SS badge, a Luftwaffe eagle, and a pistol tucked in his waistband under his coat. They might not have been a threat to us, but that was the moment we wrapped up and headed home. I was a wedding videographer for a while, and I prepped with the couple in the weeks leading up to the day, so I had a solid plan for what to cover. I started capturing footage of the bride and groom getting ready, but the groom told me not to bother filming him, which seemed odd, though I did not think much of it. I followed the bride until the ceremony, which went fine, nothing out of the ordinary. At the reception the groom told me to take a seat before the speeches, which was unusual since speeches are usually essential to capture on camera. Everyone had a small gift on their plate, and the groom said it was a surprise. The bride seemed unaware but was glowing and thought it was cute. After a few speeches from the wedding party, the parents, and then the bride and groom. The groom began by asking everyone to open their gifts. Almost immediately there was an uproar. People started freaking out. I heard high-pitched screams, and it turned out the groom had photo evidence that the bride had been cheating on him with his best man, and he wanted everyone to see it. You have to be a special kind of ruthless to go through the whole day, the ceremony and everything, just to burn your wife like that. She ran away, and I did too. To this day I wish I had seen that photo. Who knows what it showed.